Hey guys, we are in First Kings 2 now. If you remember, a little recap of First Kings 1. Solomon has become king, and his brother Adonijah, though before this, David is old and almost at the point of dying, but not quite dying yet. He's still on the throne. And the oldest brother left, who's actually the fourth oldest brother, but all the other brothers are dead. Adonijah, who is Absalom's brother, basically goes, I think I should be king. I mean, I'm the next oldest guy, and he just basically gets everything ready, gets a group of guys, a small group of guys, contingent to have a feast. They basically have a feast honoring him as the next king, and they hear about it. Nathan and some of the other guys hear about it, and by the way, the high priest Abiathar was in on it, and Joab was in on it, and so they are at that feast as well. And they hear about it. Nathan the prophet hears about it, and Bathsheba hears about it. And they go to King David and said, "Did you make it Adonijah the king? Because he claimed that he's the king now, and but you promised Solomon would be the king. God said Solomon would be the next king, evidently." And so David goes and he officially makes him the king and has a huge parade. And while they're still at their little feast, they hear of a commotion outside. What's going on? They look out the windows and see what's going on out here. Oh, the king made Solomon the king, and he's like, and the rest of the people at the table like, yeah, I gotta go, and they leave. And so Adonijah, if you remember, ran and grabbed hold of the altar, the horns of the altar, for mercy, because that was in the ancient culture in those days. That's how you obtain mercy. In any altar, there wasn't supposed to be violence, and so Solomon told Adonijah, "All right, I will give you mercy, but you are on thin ice, buddy, because this is treason essentially that you did. You just claimed the throne when you knew it was." And remember, he knew that it was supposed to go to Solomon. He was just kind of trying to sneak in there and establish himself because he knew it, and it was evident that he knew it because he invited his brothers, but invited everybody except for Solomon. And so he basically told Solomon told Adonijah, "You're on thin ice. You're basically on probation. You mess up once, you're done." So that leads us to chapter 2. So now the days of David drew near that he should die, that he charged Solomon his son, saying, "I go the way of all the earth. Be strong, therefore, and prove yourself a man." David's basically giving his last word of encouragement to Solomon. Keep the charge of the Lord your God, to walk in his ways, keep his statutes, his commandments. He's telling him, as I'm sure all of your parents would do if they were going to leave you for the very last time, telling you, follow God, trust in God. That's the only thing that matters. Follow God. He's telling him to do that. And verse 4, that the Lord may fulfill his word which he spoke concerning me, saying, if your sons take heed to their way, to walk before me in truth with all of their heart and with all of their soul, he said, you shall not lack a man on the throne of Israel. How incredible is this promise? God says, if your sons follow me, all they got to do is follow God, all they got to do is follow me, then they will be on the throne forever. And that's it's a pretty incredible promise. It would be like saying, I don't know, let's say you are a baseball player, and God says to you, as long as you follow me and you don't, turn your back on me, I will allow you to keep playing professional Major League Baseball. It'd be like, why would you ever not? It's like, come on now. We're going to find out eventually David's descendants, his sons, didn't follow him, and eventually his great-great-great-grandsons get pulled from the throne. But anyway, he tells Solomon, just follow God. That's all you got to worry about. That's it. And God will make it okay for you. But before he dies, he says in verse 5, moreover, remember, you also know what Joab did and what he did to the two commanders of the armies of Israel, Abner and Amasa. Remember, he murdered both of them. Abner in retaliation for killing his brother, and Amasa probably out of jealousy. You see, Joab's a really strange character. He's like fiercely loyal to David. He's very, very loyal to David. But he also doesn't obey at all. He's completely disobedient. He's a renegade, does whatever he wants all the time. And so he says, remember, I've been pretty merciful to Joab, but he did a lot of wrong things, and make sure that he shed blood he basically murdered people, and he deserves justice for it. And he said basically, don't let his gray hair go down to the grave in peace. Basically, don't let him die of old age. He deserves to be put to death for what he did. And he said, make sure you show kindness to the sons of Barzillai, the Gileadite. Or Barzillai was like an elderly man who he probably died by this point in time, but he had given David food and supplies while David was running from Absalom, and in his time of great need, because David didn't have time to get everything from the palace. He said, make sure you show the sons of Barzillai mercy. Make sure you're nice to them. He said, but he also brings up Shimei. Remember, Shimei was the guy throwing rocks at David, saying, you renegade, you rebellious son, you rebelled from Saul, and now this is what you get during Absalom's reign. And then as soon as Absalom was gone, Shimei was like, haha, sorry, I think you're great, King David. And David said, okay, I forgive you. And he told Shimei that he promised that he would not put him to death. However, now David's dying, and says to Solomon, my promise is going to be broken once I die. He deserves punishment as well. He deserved to be punished right away. He deserved to be put to death because it was treasonous what he was saying, but David didn't put him to death. And he basically says to Solomon, he deserves something. I don't know. You can do whatever you want. Punish him however you want. He says, don't hold him guiltless, for you are a wise man and know what you ought to do. And so he basically leaves it up to Solomon. Figure out what you're going to do with Shimei. So then David in 10, 11, and 12, David dies. Picking up in verse 13. Now Adonijah, remember, the last time we see Adonijah, he's begging Solomon not to put him to death for treason, which he committed treason, which is punishable by death. And he's begging Solomon not to put him to death. And Solomon says, okay, you're on thin ice, though. One mess up, you're done. So he goes to Solomon's mom. And he says, hey, Bathsheba, I want to talk to you. And she said, do you come peaceably? And, she has a good right to ask that. Remember what Nathan had come to Bathsheba and said, I don't know if you know this, but Adonijah is having a feast right now proclaiming himself as king, and you better do something about it or else you and your son are going to be in trouble. Because he knew Adonijah was most likely his next step after the feast was going to be to search out, or as soon as David died at least, search out Bathsheba and Solomon and kill them both. So now she sees Adonijah and goes like, and Adonijah is, put in his place, but she sees him come up to her, and she says, are we okay? Do you come peaceably? And he says, yeah, it's fine. I'm not coming to kill you. And so he says, I have something to say to you. She goes, okay, go ahead. He goes, well, in verse 15, you know that the kingdom was mine. You know the kingdom was mine. And all Israel had set their expectations. All of Israel, the entire nation of Israel, expected me to be king, and I should reign. However, the kingdom has been turned over and become my brother's, your son's kingdom, for it was his from the Lord. So he kind of has a little bit of a skewed perspective, we can see. So he was saying, the kingdom was mine. Well, yes, by heredity, by age, it was supposed to go to you by age because he was the oldest. But God specifically said, I don't want Adonijah. I want Solomon to reign. It was set up. And so the only person who thought he was going to be, and he said all of Israel had their eyes on me. No, they didn't. He had like a small little group of people at a kitchen table. That's who he had. When everybody heard that Solomon was the king, they all had a huge parade. And he was like, he basically was making the case, well, the kingdom was stolen away from me, and I let that happen. So you kind of owe me one there, Bathsheba. This is basically what he's making. He said, I make one petition of you, don't deny me. She goes, okay, what is it? He goes, please speak to King Solomon, your son, for he'll give you what you want. And she's like, okay, what do you want me to have him give you? He goes, I would like to have Abishag, the Shunammite, as wife. Now, if you remember back to chapter 1 of 1 Kings, this girl Abishag was a young girl, not young girl, I keep saying young girl, but she's like a young woman David was probably in his 70s. She's probably in her early 20s. She's like just marrying age. And David needed someone to just keep him warm. And so she married him ceremonially, just simply because it would be inappropriate for her to like lay next to him just to keep him warm. Be kind of inappropriate. So he married her, and she just basically laid there to kind of just keep him warm. But now that he died, she's a widow. She doesn't have a husband anymore. And Adonijah says, ask him if it's okay, if he would mind if I married Abishag. Okay, so on the first level, if he, likes Abishag and he thinks she's pretty or whatever, on the surface level, there's nothing wrong with him wanting to marry her. She's not married anymore. David died, so she's a, single woman now. So on the surface, it would be like, okay, what's wrong with this? But you have to remember, the wife of a king was seen as kind of like a queen in a way. So by him saying he wanted to marry Abishag, it was him kind of being like, I want to claim part of what is the king's, not property, because obviously she's a person, but the king's, field of what belongs to him or whatever. It would almost be like him saying, just ask Solomon if I could just, wear the crown and sit on the throne, a couple times a week. Just see if that's fine. If, I could have his crown. I could have the crown and the robe and the palace. If I could just live in the king's, bedroom, he could live down the hallway, but I could live in the king's bedroom. It's a pretty outrageous request. And so she promises that she will mention it to Solomon. And I don't think she necessarily wants this to happen, but she thinks probably that at the very least, she should probably let Solomon know what Adonijah is planning. So Bathsheba went to King Solomon to speak for him for Adonijah, and the king rose to meet her and sat on the throne, and had even a throne set for his mom, and she sat on his right hand. And he shows a lot of respect that he has for his mom, that he loves his mom. And she asked him, I have desire one small petition of you. Do not refuse me. And we don't know her tone here. And he says, ask mother, for I will not refuse you. He basically is like, Mom, anything, I'll give you whatever you want. And at first, when I first read this when I was younger, I thought that she was really wanting Abishag to be given to Solomon. But some commentators, and I tend to agree with this, think she might be being sarcastic. She's like, hey, I just have one little request. And he's like, oh, anything, what's your little request? The little request that Adonijah asked if he could marry Abishag. Just a tiny request, and it's really not a tiny request. It's a huge, unbelievable request. And so, and you can tell that by King Solomon's reaction. 22, he says, why do you ask, Abishag the Shunammite for Adonijah? He might as well ask for the whole kingdom. He's basically going, he might as well ask for the kingdom. He might as well ask to wear the crown and decide all the things and be called king. He might as well, because it's like that outrageous. And think about how foolish it is for Adonijah to do this. He's on thin ice. He knows the last thing that happened was Absalom said, I'm going to be watching you. You mess up once, you're done. And the first thing he does is basically try to, shimmy his way in to part of the king's duties. And so he said, Adonijah shall be put to death today. And so he sent a guy named Benaiah. He sent Benaiah there. He goes, you know what? I promised him that he would. I gave him a chance, but he decides he wants to try to be king again. That's it. His grace is gone. Benaiah, go get him. And so Benaiah goes and kills him. And so now he's starting to take care of what David had asked him to take care of. So he goes and sends for Abiathar. Abiathar was the high priest who sided with Adonijah. And so he brings Abiathar there. And he tells him, what you're going to do is, I'm not going to kill you. He has a lot of grace with him. He goes, I'm not going to put you to death this time because you carried the ark of the Lord for my father David, because you were afflicted every time my father was afflicted. He basically was like, you were very loyal to my father. Up until basically yesterday, you were very loyal. So I'm not going to put you to death, even though it was treasonous what you did. But I'm going to have you remove you from being the high priest. So he basically removes him from being high priest and any kind of priest and sent him to just work in the fields at his house. And again, this was merciful to Abiathar. His punishment, the appropriate punishment, was death. And when Joab hears about this, though, he hears that he's starting to punish people, Joab knows his number is up, and he goes and he runs to the altar, and he runs and does what Adonijah had done before, took hold of the horns of the altar, basically, which is a physical appeal for mercy. And so people came and he's like, all right, send for Joab, and people came and told him. Joab actually ran into the temple and took hold of the altar to try to get mercy. Because remember, in the ancient world, whatever religion people were, when you go to the altar, there's not supposed to be any violence at the altar. But this is Israel. Israel is like, justice is justice. And so he's like, oh, he's at the altar, asking for mercy, tells Benaiah, go get him at the altar then. And so Benaiah goes and went to the tabernacle of the Lord and called for Joab and said, come on out. And he said, no, I refuse. If you're going to kill me here. Probably, who knows, maybe he was even challenging him. He's like, oh yeah, if you want to get me, come in and get me. So Benaiah's like, okay. And so the king said, go in and get him. And so Benaiah went in and killed Joab, because God is concerned with justice. And it doesn't matter that it happens to be at the altar. He's concerned with justice, and he puts him down. And so now Solomon goes and takes that position of head of the army. Joab is gone now because he's put to death. It was Joab's. Then Abner kind of was working with him, and Joab killed Abner. Then David put Amasa up, and then Joab killed Amasa. And so Joab got the job again, but now Joab gets put to death, and Solomon puts Benaiah as king of the army. And he puts Zadok, who is another priest, he puts him in place of Abiathar as the high priest. And then comes Shimei. Remember, Shimei was the one throwing rocks at David. Verse 36, king called and sent for Shimei, and Shimei is probably pretty nervous. He's like, what do you want with me? What's my punishment going to be? And he says to him, build yourself a house in Jerusalem and dwell there, and do not go from there anywhere. He says to him essentially, you're going to build a house in Jerusalem, somewhere in Jerusalem, you're going to build a house, and you have to stay there in Jerusalem for the rest of your life. He said, you're going to be quarantined, essentially. You're going to be quarantined, and you cannot leave your city. And he said, for it shall be on the day that you go out and cross the brook Kidron, which is a little brook next to Jerusalem, know for certain that you shall surely die. Your blood shall be on your own head. So he gives him this as his punishment. Again, he's deserving to be put to death. His punishment could be death. And Solomon has that option. And he brings Shimei in. And Shimei might even be hoping, that he's not going to be put to death, but he might be expecting to be put to death. And he tells Shimei, this is going to be a punishment. I'm going to allow you to make a house in Jerusalem and stay in Jerusalem. And you can live in Jerusalem. And as long as you stay in Jerusalem, you can live. He said, but if you leave Jerusalem at any point in time, you're going to be put to death. If I hear that you left Jerusalem, you are now going to be put to death because you broke the agreement. And so Shimei says to him in verse 38, listen to this, he says, the saying is good. He goes, as my lord the king said, so your servant will do it. And so Shimei not only accepts his punishment, but he agrees heartily to it. He's going, oh, that's great. Remember, he came in thinking he probably was going to die. And Solomon just basically says, you can't go far away. You just have to stay within one city. And Jerusalem's a big city. It's big enough. It is a punishment. But it's basically that, he's stuck in this one city, and of all the punishments, it's not that bad. But it happened at the end of 3 years that 2 slaves of Shimei ran away. So he had slaves. Israel wasn't really supposed to have slaves, but sometimes they would have slaves from when they would conquer another nation and then take people prisoner. And so he has 2 slaves that work for him, and they run away. And it was told to him that they had fled to Gath. So he said, well, I got to go get them. And so he saddled his donkey and went to Gath to seek his slaves. And he went and found them and grabbed them and brought them back. And Solomon was told that he had left. And so he brought Shimei back to him. And he called for him, and he brings him before him. He says, "Yes, king." He goes, "Didn't I make you swear by the Lord, saying, know for certain on the day that you go out and travel anywhere, you shall surely die? And you even said the word is good. You even said, I agree to it. It's a good saying." And so he basically says to him, the summary for the rest of the chapter is, you agreed. You said it was great, and you said it was a good saying, and you agreed to it. Now, by your own words, you're going to be put to death. So Solomon seems like these first couple of chapters, he seems pretty, pretty mean sometimes, you might think, but he's bringing justice, because there's a thing to do with justice and love and mercy, right? There's mercy on one side and justice on the other. There's a fine balance. Mercy is terrific, but without justice at all, it would be really sad. I mean, think about it. You want mercy for yourself, but you want justice for those around you. If you're being bullied by an older kid, let's say there's an older kid that's bullying, pushing you into lockers, and you really don't like it every time you get a sandwich at lunchtime or something, they come and knock it on the floor, and you're getting sick of it. I really wanted to eat that sandwich, and now it's on the floor and everything, you're getting really sick of it, and you come to me and say, "Mr. Hanley, I'm just really upset. There's this older kid who is picking on me and pushing me around. They've hurt me, and they're throwing my lunch on the floor, and I don't have a lunch now, and they did it on purpose." And if I said, "I don't care," and I didn't care, I was like, whatever, I gotta forgive him, I gotta give him mercy, you'd be upset. You'd be like, what, you gonna just keep letting him do it? And I'm like, well, I don't want to come down on him, harsh judgment. I want to be merciful. You'd be like, that's no fair, right? Wouldn't you be upset about that? And so sometimes we need to be merciful, and sometimes we need to have justice. It's a really fine line. That's what parents do when they parent. They have to figure out, when can I show mercy and when can I show justice? And there are times, think of it. I love showing mercy. I'm a worldly person. I'm a carnal sinner. I'm not holy like God. I'm not perfect. I am a sinner saved by grace. And I don't want to give my kids punishments. I want to give them mercy. So how much more so, if God is completely filled with love, does he want to give us mercy? But in the same time, with my kids, I see when I give mercy, too much mercy, they just get used to it, and the expectation is, I can do what I want. I'm just going to be given mercy afterwards. There's not going to be punishment coming. There's not going to be a consequence coming, because he gives me mercy all the time. So why would I fear? Why would I hesitate to do this wrong thing? And so that's when the consequence has to come to remind them, this is what happens. And then they all of a sudden realize, oh, I don't want to do that anymore. So there has to be that balance of justice and mercy. And so Solomon's kind of tying up all these loose ends, because David was sometimes a little bit too merciful with people. So he's tying up all these loose ends to start his reign in the right way. So that's it for 1 Kings 2. We'll be in 1 Kings 3 next time. I hope you guys are having a great day. I hope to see you soon. Bye.